Yo book nerds! Wearing my Twins shirt today because I went to a Twins game the other day with my boyfriend and they won. I love the Twins. Baseball is my favorite sport. Gotta represent them. It was my first game since before COVID and I usually go every year at least once, and so I was really happy to be back at a Twins game. I finished reading Peter and the Thieves, which is the second book in the Peter and the Starcatchers series. And I have to say that I loved this one probably just as much as the first one. It was different, but it kept me very interested. And sometimes, you know, sequels don't live up to the first one. I will still say the first one's probably my favorite, but this one I did really enjoy a lot. I read a good chunk of this book while on vacation, hence the thumbnail of this video. I was in Arizona and there were so many cool cacti, I just had to take a picture of my book with a cactus for the thumbnail, just for fun, just because. So this book was a lot darker than the first book, I have to say. Pun not intended, because shadows play a big role in this book. So right now, I will say if you haven't read the first book, during this video there may be spoilers for that book. So if you don't want spoilers for the first book, then don't watch this video until you've read it. Right now I'm going to talk about the book, but I'm not going to get into many spoilers just yet for this book. I will at the end of the video, but I'll give you another warning before I get into spoilers for this book. So this book was, again, like I said, very dark. So at the beginning of this book, we rejoin Peter and the Lost Boys on the island, and these bad men come to the island, and with them is Slank. And so Slank and these other bad guys are still looking for that star stuff that Peter was able to take away from Slank in the first book. And so Slank is back with other villains that are new. They quickly find out that the star stuff isn't on the island, and so they leave the island and they go to England. And Peter knows they're gonna go after Molly and her family, so he decides to stow away on their ship so that he can go find Molly and warn her. So that all happens very quickly on in the first few chapters. So that's kind of the setup for this story. And so overall, the book was very entertaining and I flew through it really fast, way faster than I thought I would, because it's over 550 pages. It's pretty chunky even though it's middle grade. But I really liked it, and I really liked the way the story progressed. It had some issues, it wasn't perfect, but again, it's middle grade, so I just tried not to think too hard about some of the plot holes. But the plot holes didn't really bother me that much. Like, I really enjoyed the story. I do think that I liked the first book a little bit better because it was set on the island more, and this book really isn't. It's mostly set in England, but it was still a lot of fun. So when I first started reading this, I thought the cover might be Peter and Wendy, because that's just kind of what it looks like if you've seen the Disney movie. But it's not. This is Molly still, and this is a character named Lord Umbra. He's a very bad dude. And so Lord Umbra is a shadow thief, and he can steal someone's shadow and essentially like take over their body. And he has aligned himself with Slank. And so that's one of the ways that this book gets progressively darker than the first one, is that the bad guys just keep getting worse and worse. Like Captain Hook, who was Black Stash from the first book, he's really just like a side villain. He's just kind of a bumbling idiot who we don't really take seriously. Like, he's dangerous, but like he's kind of a sideline. And so Slank was like the bad guy from the first book, but now Slank's not even the worst bad guy. There's this other guy named Captain Nereza who's worse than Slank, but Nereza is afraid of Lord Umbra. So like it goes Captain Hook, Slank, Nereza, Lord Umbra is the worst bad guy. And so they just get progressively worse. Like, I mean, Lord Umbra can basically steal your soul and keep it as long as he wants. Basically, if he has your shadow, you're not living anymore. You're like in a coma, essentially. And he can control you if he has your shadow. So like, he is the scariest of all of the bad guys in this book. And there's just lots of good scenes throughout this. There's a lot of good tension throughout this that you just want to keep reading, or at least I did. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of spoiler territory. I'm not going to give away the ending or anything, but I want to talk about a few things that might be a little spoilery for this book. So forewarning. So even though this book was progressively darker than the first one, I would say it was still humorous because the opening and closing scenes just I'm sorry if you can hear my boyfriend's cat. She is trying to get in the door and she keeps meowing. Here's a picture of my boyfriend's cat. Her name is Nala. So I'm sorry if you can hear her in the background of this video. But anyway, I would say this book is humorous even though it's dark. And I just loved the way it opened and the way it ended. So at the beginning, we see Peter, and he has a mango and he's trying to fly around and drop it on Captain Hook's head. And then at the very end, he does the same thing. Peter is back on the island and he's flying around and he's trying to drop mango on Hook's head. And I actually laughed out loud when I read the ending because of that full loop back to the beginning scene, and I enjoyed that. It was very cute. And I love when a book can actually get real emotion out of me like that. It means it's good. There is, in those scenes, some tension building with the Lost Boys and Peter, especially at the beginning. When Peter is flying around trying to drop the mango on Hook's head, the other Lost Boys want to be able to do that too, but they can't. They can't fly, not without star stuff, and Peter doesn't want to use his star stuff because he has a little locket of some for emergencies only. So the other Lost Boys, they just have to walk around, and they are getting kind of jealous. You can see the tension between them and Peter, and I wonder how that's going to develop going further on into the series. And that tension and jealousy does get them into a little bit of trouble in this book. There was more foreshadowing for Molly. If you watched my first video, you'll know that I have a theory about Molly potentially being Wendy's mother. So there was some more foreshadowing which just kind of reinforces that idea for me. So George Darling shows up in this book, and as soon as I read his name, I was like, oh my gosh, now we have the Darlings. So George and Molly are friends, so I wonder if they get married later on and she becomes Mrs. Darling. I don't know. But I'm still not sure because I want to say that either J.M. Barrie or the Disney version of it named Mrs. Darling as Mary Darling, but I don't remember for sure, so don't quote me on that. I don't know where I got that. I just have that somewhere in my head that her name was Mary Darling, and I didn't do the research to figure it out. So maybe Molly and George are Wendy's grandparents. Maybe their son is George Darling Jr., who is Wendy's father. Or maybe Molly changes her name to Mary because she needs to protect her identity because for some reason with the Starcatchers. And this is all speculation on my part, like honestly, I don't know. I just want Molly to be Wendy's mom or grandmother or something. So I feel like that is heavy foreshadowing, but I could be wrong still. I just really feel like Molly has to be related to Wendy in some way, shape, or form. And especially now that George Darling is a character in the book, yeah, I really feel that strongly. And maybe Molly isn't. Maybe this is just how we get introduced to George Darling and he marries someone completely different. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that. And there was another Easter egg in here that I really, really enjoyed. J.M. Barrie becomes a character in this, and I loved it. As soon as I read that scene, I was like geeking out because like it was just such a big like nod to J.M. Barrie and the inspiration for this series, and I just enjoyed it so much. And they even like, so they have the J.M. Barrie character give Peter directions, and J.M. Barrie says it's the second path on the right and straight on, and that's what Peter says in the original Peter Pan. To get to Neverland is the second star to the right and straight on till morning. I just loved those little parallels and that big nod to J.M. Barrie for his original work and being the inspiration for this series. It was so enjoyable to me because I love literature behind literature, and so if you didn't know who originally wrote Peter Pan, if you didn't ever read the original Peter Pan, you would have not got that reference, and it's so perfect. I loved it. And so I really enjoyed this book and recommend the sequel. Let me know if you've read this and what you thought of it. If you didn't like it, let me know why. I really enjoyed it. And so I have started the third book in the series, which is Peter and the Secret of Rundoon. I'm a little over halfway through it. This one's not as long as book 2, but it's still almost 500 pages, so I mean it is a big boy again. All of them are pretty big, 400 to 500 pages long, all 5 books in this series. But I'm a little over halfway, and I really like this one too. I'm enjoying it, obviously, since I'm flying through it. So hopefully I will finish it soon, and then I'll have a video up on my thoughts on this one. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Also go like my Facebook page if you want more bookish content from me throughout the week. Otherwise, I will see you guys next Monday. Thanks for talking books with me.